Arc 6, Chapter 88, Ask Thy Will Under the Clouds. It happened approximately simultaneously as the outbreak of light above the clouds. The heavy clouds, and above that, the two battlefields distanced from each other. Should there be anyone who could observe the both of them at the same time, then that would be nobody but the external observer of the world. The battles inching closer to the capture of the Pleiades watchtower were finally entering their finale. That situation was Subaru. Woa H hick. The impacted ground of sand imploded, and amidst the clouds of dust and shock waves, Subaru shouted at the top of his lungs. The destructive force assailing upon his entire body possessed excessive might that could splinter him into fragments. Yet the reason why Subaru had not been reduced to pieces, Beatrice. One of the three original magic Subaru and Beatrice had derived. To be given a broad explanation, it was an absolute defensive magic of the kind which stopped the flow of time of Subaru and Beatrice's flesh bodies, thus taking no external effect. Subaru. We got so hyped when we first derived it, but because the guy who used a similar ability was just the worst. Whenever it's used, it feels like using a last resort for survival I would never otherwise use. Beatrice. That issue has already been spoken about, in fact. Betty has already decided to close her eyes, I suppose. Hearing Subaru's cries, the writing Beatrice yelled so. The ability of invincibility of the Sin Archbishop of the Witch of Greed, Regulus Corneas, was potent might befitting of being labeled as being backward compatible with this EMM. Though its user was the worst, its practical usage was outstanding, the level which they should be aiming for, yet the territory they did not wish to reach. Subaru. It means having a guy who's nauseating to even think of as reference. Living by eating experiences was something he had often heard of. Finding that by itself being reminiscent of the Sin Archbishops of Gluttony, thinking of them as a bunch who would pose as obstacles in all ways left and right, Subaru felt tired from the bottom of his heart. But without that, it would not be possible to protect himself or Beatrice and Maylie in the first place. Maylie. Ha! Delirious, Maylie breathed softly in Subaru's arms. Her face writhed in pain, but at the very least she could breathe. Subaru could feel the pain flowing into him lessen bit by bit. It was a sign Beatrice's magic was working as intended. And at this rate, things would certainly start to look better. Hopefully. Probably. Beatrice, it is extremely difficult to keep both EMM and my healing magic up, in fact. If it weren't for Betty, all three of us would be dead by now, I suppose. Subaru. Yeah, I know. It's just that. As he felt gratitude for Beatrice's scolding, Subaru looked into himself. He had no way left other than clenching his molars and holding back the pain. However, the main problem was in his mana. In the first place, Subaru had no choice but to be Beatrice's magic tank. Despite that, he had as much mana as the average person, probably less due to being a failure in magic. Using EMM like this was akin to becoming a filled mana bucket with holes poked in it. At this rate, either EMM or Beatrice's healing would stop. And so, Subaru. There's no way I can stop Maylie's healing. Beatrice, then we have no choice but to kill EMM, in fact. You're in charge of dealing with the timing and what happens after, I suppose. Subaru. Oh yeah, leave it to me. And I hope you'll continue to treat Maylie. Then do as I say just as I say it, like the good little spirit you are, Biko. Beatrice. You are horrible, in fact. They bickered, then exchanged glances and released EMM simultaneously. At the same time, they jumped out of their spot and retreated. And right at their heels, hot in pursuit were the Crimson Scorpion and the horde of witch beasts. Even as they fought each other, they had their eye on Subaru. As per the norm, he was massively handicapped, unable to go far from the tower, and especially in how his target was still that Crimson Scorpion. Should this continue, worst-case scenario was that, Subaru, the witch will, the mere mention of return by death, would trigger a release of miasma from him, forcing the witch beasts to focus on him. As a man with little to show, this was a method he relied on often. He was already in a dangerous spot. But on the off chance the Crimson Scorpion would remain fixated on him as it has been, he could use this card to force the witch beasts and the Scorpion to begin fighting each other more violently. However, the risk of collateral was too high. Should Beatrice, Meili, and Subaru fall at the very least, Ram will too soon after due to Subaru carrying most of her burden on his own body. Through Corleonis, all involved had remained stuck on the same boat. It was puzzling how Regulus managed to lead such a lonely life despite being the owner of an authority like this. Beatrice, Subaru, Hick, EMT. On the limits of his worthless thoughts, he sensed a future of the luster's blast and being evaporated away. Thus Subaru parched his throat upon the premonition of death and activated the second of his original magic. EMT eliminated EMTK's disadvantage of immobility. Anti-magic which successfully negated all kinds of magic head-on in principle. As long as it was something fired whilst tinged with mana, there was nothing this magic could not erase. However, Subaru, I ended up using our trump card just 5 seconds after calling off EMM. Too pathetic to even be called pathetic. Rather than that, he continued to lose all means of striking next, and had been wholly and seriously cornered. Continuing to aim for Subaru and the rest, the tail stinger of the Crimson Scorpion, the flames of the Hungry Horse Kings, along with a variety of other witch beasts all attacked towards them, seeking to reduce them to cinders. Inhaling, Subaru stiffened his body. He must use the third and final of his original magic, or they shan't be able to break through this situation. However, that one had not been perfected yet. Should he fail, then there lied the possibility of the result being the three of them drifting in imaginary space. Subaru. I don't trust myself enough to gamble on some last-moment awakening. Even if he had admitted Natsuki Subaru to be a pretty great guy, he did not blindly believe he was some super guy capable of breaking through any situation whatsoever. He simply was bad at giving up. Even if he was held down, he would simply stand up a greater number of times. In other words, that meant he was often held down as well. Subaru. This is no place to show how much of a habitual loser I am, though it's an unfavorable gamble. Stranger, you claim to be able to manage through simple obstinacy and appearances, though that too is truly a decision befitting of yourself. It was the instant Subaru had determined he had no choice but to test it out. An abrupt voice descended from overhead, and a shadow slipped into the space between the attacks and Subaru and the rest. It was far too dazzling that Subaru subconsciously closed his eyes. No metaphors, it truly was dazzling. The shadow was gleaming in the hues of a rainbow. Stranger. Al-Clausiria. The next instant, against the assailing strikes, a light that slashed down the lights was fired. Shockwaves of destruction, scorching flames, a blitz with the life on the line. A black light declined them all. Overflowing waters swallowed them all. The whipped-up sandstorm averted the energy. A deed of controlling nature in the truest sense, and the one to perform this deed was an elegant back who landed atop the sand, having swung a long, slender knight sword. Julius, there were certain circumstances, so I rushed my way here. It seems that was a precarious spot. Pronouncing so, turning towards Subaru was, of course, the greatest knight Julius Juculius. Even with his outfit tainted by blood and sand at multiple spots, he stood there calmly. Clad in the radiance of rainbow, his standing form was more graceful than ever before. His gallant arrival made Subaru's voice quiver as he said, "Julius." Subaru. I had sent you a message asking you to go help in other dangerous spots once you're done. Julius. Yes, I did hear so. Hence, I came here. I'm sorry, but even when compared to all others, I judged this place to be the most dangerous. Subaru. Shut up, what's with that wound on your face? What about Reed? Julius. I was utterly defeated. He entirely took his leave with his victory. Subaru. So damn la me. You should have just won then. Would have died had you not come here. I'll say it only once, but thanks. Hearing gratitude mixed within harsh words, Julius laughed with a heh, having formed a white scar below his left eye. An irritating attitude, but it seemed he had finished his battle against Reed by himself and gained something for himself. It's proof, Subaru. Did you reconcile with your quasi-spirits? Julius. To be precise, those girls bloomed from being buds and gained the sublimity of spirits. Also, to say we reconcile wouldn't be adequate either, since there never was any discord between us. Encircling the smiling Julius surroundings were 6 quasi-spirits now, spirits whose illumination had been augmented. Upon his name being plundered by the authority of gluttony, the connection between them had also vanished. The spirits followed him without lending any strength. Their turmoil lasted for long. However, with both sides' trenches filled, they reared a bond greater than before. Smartly rebinding the contract with the 6 spirits was an outrageously transparent play. Subaru. Meanwhile, just hitting on Biko has got my hands full. You're a damn indigestible bastard. Julius. Regrettably, I have been digested before. Subaru. That's not funny. You're acting a bit too clear-headed, you know. Subaru's eyes rounded, seeing Julius turn, even having experienced the tragic ruin brought by the authority, into humor. Now that he had used the phrasing of taking the leave with victory, then he must have settled things with Reed. Since Reed's flesh body was supposed to belong to Roy Alford, then it would be natural to think he had concluded matters with one fraction of gluttony. And the fact that Julius did not allude to that potential, Hazard unmistakably meant that they had succeeded in incapacitating Alfred. Beatrice, Julius, you arrived at just the right time, I suppose. Lend Cua, in fact. Julius. Understood. Julius instantly bowed at Beatrice's call. He also judged in a moment what Maylee's condition, who was in Subaru's arms, was. From the 6 spirits, he projected ahead the spirit that governed water, the blue Cua, and its tender power poured healing mana into Maylee's body along with Beatrice's magic. On top of that, Julius, so there is a need for me to buy time. Subaru. Yeah, as you can see, Shala's going ham after turning red, but you think you can do it. Didn't you just lose to the red dude? Julius. To express the intent to make up for a loss due to that reason would be a discourteous attitude towards a lady. Avowing to confront head-on, Julius braced his knight sword and confronted the crimson scorpion Shala. The compound eyes, though, showed no will before the knight's form. Its intent to murder was still directed towards Subaru. Anything in between were mere hindering obstacles. That was its attitude toward the spirit knight, Julius, who had elevated himself to a level greater. Julius. Subaru, I shall handle Miss Shala. Anything other than that. Subaru. Handle it by myself, you say. Yeah, got it. Julius. No, cooperate with Beatrice Sama and succeed. Subaru. About 70% of everything I can do in these situations counts on Biko, you know. Quite frankly, even 70% was a very ostentatious number. It would be around 80% or 90%. What Subaru could take pride in as Beatrice's contractor was only a shrewd mind and a number of petty, foxy tricks, so even 95% wouldn't be a strange number. Regardless, Subaru, you're a lifesaver for coming back. Julius, you too seem to have relooked at your own worth, which delights me more than anything. With a close exchange, Subaru and Julius focused on their respective duties. In order to make sure none of the witch beasts' attacks reached Subaru and the others, Julius advanced ahead and exposed his own self to the rain of blades and abated damage in his rear. On the other hand, Subaru kept Maylee away from the damage being done by the witch beasts and concentrated on buying time until the condition for their victory was fulfilled, while she remained on the verge of death. Subaru. Hick! A sensation of astonishment, Subaru lifted his face as if strummed. The reason was the Pleiades watchtower, an anomaly that had occurred therein. It was Subaru. Ram's response disappeared. The scene changes. The breath volcanica beamed, swooped down upon the uppermost stratum in the form of a blue light. Emilia blocked it using the shield of ice created with all of her might, seeking to break through. During the journey through the sand sea until Pleiades watchtower, she had utilized the shield of ice for accepting the rain of coronas showered upon them from the tower, but it failed to last even a moment before the dragon breath. The multiple overlapped ice shields instantly melted, and the attack, which Emilia was hoping would just be weakened however slightly and she'd be golden, rained upon her. For but a moment, the black monolith at the back of Emilia's mind dawned upon her. It may be firm enough to remain unaffected by the dragon breath. However, on the other hand, she was concerned that the trial may be ruined should it get broken. On top of that, this was a thought unrelated to breaking through the trial. But Emilia, if it gets broken, that be Ria Ellie lonely. The handprints, which had a queer sense of déjà vu, had been left behind on the monolith. Just what connection did it have to herself, or she may simply be overthinking. However, she wished to ascertain the identity of that sensation. That is why it shan't disappear, for the sake of it to not disappear. She converged as much mana as miraculously possible and evolved it into icicle line. Though Emilia possessed mana enough to surprise even her own self, she could not manipulate those vast amounts of mana all at once. Regardless of how much mana there was within her, the quantity she could bring forth at once solely amounted to the capacity of her gate. Yet Emilia boasted output more than 10 times that of an ordinary magician, but the forte of having lived many years as a spirit arts user further expanded her potential. Magicians communicated with their gate, utilized the mana stockpiled within themselves, and meddled with the world. Spirit arts users borrowed the strength of spirits, utilized the mana in the atmosphere, and meddled with the world. And possessing groundings in both of these, Emilia was capable of doing both. Though the amount of water capable of coming out of a tap was fixed, should that water be stored in a bucket, even greater quantities of water could be used. Emilia executed this using her own flesh body and the world, halting the mana overflowing from her within in the outside world, and utilizing maximal magic heedless of her gate, Emilia. Absolute zero. That was what Subaru had named it, and had spoken of the empty theory that its materialization may be arduous. It was enough to end a real battle with a single blow, and that was around the same timing as Subaru had exclaimed it to be miraculously unbelievable. That point onwards, Emilia had entered into a contest she had never once succeeded in, and she shall make it succeed. If Emilia's ordinary magical power was to be taken as the value of 1, then the potency of this magic, which utilized the overflown power and materialized, would be close to 10 or even possibly 100. A white vacuum instantly swept conquest over the world, accompanied with such strength that even the impossible to halt flow of time would be stopped, impossible of being described as meagerly as the atmosphere being frozen. Even the breath of the dragon, who was supposed to have been met by inevitable death, was no exception. The blue light clashing from the front and an absolute null, their collision yielded a vacuum in the world. That moment, the two maximal potencies, with not the slightest delay, opposed and extinguished each other. A truly astounding extinguishment accompanied with no sound or impact, and once the time that had supposedly been halted began to flow again, Emilia readied an ice lance and flew towards the front. Emilia, hi Yuoa. With her slender throat trembling, Emilia charged at Volcanica. Wielding strength from the entirety of her frame, her body felt incredibly heavy. Though the used mana itself had been what she had exited out of her body, the burden put onto Emilia upon its utilization was tremendous. Turning over a bucket with water stored in it, naturally, called for adequate strength as well. Since she had used power akin to turning over a fountain instead of a bucket, it would only be a matter of course should Emilia feel totally exhausted. However, she voiced, Emilia, I can't lose heart. Shouting like that, Emilia poured life into herself. Though stamina and mana were different things, yet by making herself hear those words with all of her might, she felt the rise of a strength that had previously been asleep. Though it may be a misapprehension, if the one being deceived was her own self, then sometimes lying wasn't all bad. Volcanica, Sataloa. With its breath defended against, Volcanica swung its forelimbs and tail whilst roaring. The impact charged from the close exterior, and Emilia defended against it by relying on the sensation of the icicles deployed in her surroundings as the generated 7 ice warriors got shattered. They assisted Emilia's body, evading the impact being swung down upon them by leaping sideways. The ice warriors halted the following up forelimbs with their bodies, and borrowing their shoulders, Emilia leapt greatly. As the tail whip swung upon the midair, Emilia reached the height of the 2 ice warriors who were supporting her on their back, and devoured their bodies as sacrifice. Emilia, Sha, Hiya, Ya. Borrowing strength by way of their noble sacrifice, Emilia hammered in the ice lance whilst rotating her body. Though it was not sufficient enough to pair the divine dragon's hull, but enough to catch its attention. Evading the forelimbs swung in annoyance as some of her silver hair got sliced off, Emilia successfully charged into Volcanica's bosom whilst risking her life. From that position, Emilia, that White scale, if only it could be touched, if only it could be successfully attacked. Pondering so, Emilia looked overhead. The divine dragon once again close enough to touch, its white scale which was difficult to directly look at. With her immediate gaze set on it, Emilia widened her eyes. The reason being astonishment. It had not been a scale that had turned white. It was not. Present there was a white scar large enough to be mistaken for a scale. Emilia. An old wound. The wound had already been closed, and would surely not ache upon being touched. However, the divine dragon disliked the wound simply being touched, and had agonized that much. Comprehending that it was involved with Volcanica's unerasable old memories, Emilia paused her breath. Taking advantage of her hesitancy of that singular moment, Volcanica flapped its wings. Emilia. Ah, hick! Volcanica's ginormous frame ascended above at once, leaving Emilia behind as she stretched her hands. Emilia greatly lamented her own failure. This was the utmost unfavorable situation of crossing lances with an existence possessing wings. Should she be arbitrarily attacked from a location beyond her reach, the liabilities put on her would accumulate in the blink of an eye. Emilia. No. Emilia instantly put her hands on the floor, and from her feet arose ice. Extending the foothold of ice she had improvised and produced toward the sky, Emilia pursued and desperately reached for Volcanica, who was attempting to fly upward. However, even that foothold of ice hit its limit by 10 meters, 20 meters, and the distance beyond that point was outside of her reach. Emilia. Everyone, please! Ice warriors responded to Emilia's call and further raised the foothold of ice. The soldiers of ice climbed up to the tip of the foothold, which had met its end, then sprung from there at once. Then jumping further by stepping on the back of the sprung soldiers, repeating this 6 times, Emilia stepped into the back of the final one soldier. Emilia. Sorry. The ice warriors she had powerfully stepped on fractured by their backs. However, all of the falling 7 ice warriors up their thumbs and smiled as they crashed. Accepting such encouragement of theirs, Emilia's hand, having jumped the final time, reached for Volcanica's tail. Volcanica. Foolish. He drew back its tail along with that single word, and Emilia's fingers grazed the air, and the drawn tail energetically rebounded towards the dumbfounded Emilia. Midair, nowhere for her to run. Even if she were to quickly produce a shield of ice, strength that could shatter it and reach her alone would be sufficiently lethally destructive for Emilia. Emilia. Ah. Failure, difficulty. What should she do? All kinds of thoughts entangled within Emilia's mind. Amidst the sensation of deceleration of the flow of time, she desperately searched for a breakthrough solution and mobilized every nook and cranny of her body and mind to see if she could do something. She merely did not possess the option named giving up, because none of the people Emilia dearly loved, not a single one of them, chose to give up. That is why, Emilia, I won't give up either. However, mere mighty words could save no one. As though to teach her of that transiency, the tail whip of the divine dragon, cognizant of a long length of time, drew near Emilia, stranger. Emilia-sama! At that instant, stormy wind coming from directly below faintly assisted Emilia's ascent. The scene changes. Her body uplifted by the upward wind, Emilia's situation faintly changed. From a situation where death had a probability of 100% to a situation where death had a probability of 90%. And that 10% probability of survival was perfectly utilized by Emilia, who was ignorant to giving up. Emilia. Hick! The whipping tail of the divine dragon, aiming for Emilia's head. Gathered with Ascen's vigor, that tail whip's aim slipped from Emilia's head to her torso. Comprehending this from her instinct rather than close distance, Emilia folded in her knees with all of her strength, seeking to evade its striking range. By making her body smaller, Emilia's tiptoes grazed past the swung tail whip, and the fearsome impact made Emilia's body twirl at an incredible speed. With her knees in her hold, Emilia's body was blown overhead. Whilst engulfed in impact such that it felt as if her internal organs would burst out from her head, Emilia gnashed her teeth, generated a foothold of ice in the sky, and forcefully halted her body. An explosive sound echoed, and Emilia, having accepted impact with her entire body, looked downward with tears in her eyes. Emilia's field of vision, for whom the ground and the heavens had been turned around due to using the ceiling of ice created in the skies as her foothold. Visible was Volcanica's head, and the distant shadow of a person who had appeared from the staircase of the first layer. To be precise, it was not a shadow of a person. It was the shadow of a person and a ground dragon. Emilia, Ram and... It was Ram who had barged in and had reached out to Emilia, assisting her ascend. Visible from afar, Ram had wounds and blood covering all of her body, and Emilia was unable to hide her astonishment to see her come running to this place in that condition. But it was thanks to her assistance that Emilia managed to survive without getting her head hammered. Borrowing her assistance, Emilia, now for once, poured strength into her knees, in order to wage assault on Volcanica at once, using this ceiling of ice as foothold. Before Emilia, now, Volcanica had been acting strange. With its tail remaining in the swung stance without glancing towards Emilia, it was looking below. It seemed as if it had set Ram, who had assisted Emilia, as its next prey. However, that was not the case. The ancient divine dragon, what its amber eyes were viewing was not Ram. It was Volcanica, Patrash, Emilia, Hi-Yeroa Hick. With energy that erased Volcanica's mumbling, Emilia's body shot itself downwards. Late by half a moment, Volcanica's tail as it glanced upward shattered the ceiling of ice. Too late. Emilia's form was already gone from there and wasn't even ahead of him, aiming for its throat. Emilia's fired form created a different foothold of ice now, a slope of ice. In Pristella, when she had been running away from Regulus together with Subaru, this was the article she had created in order to not decrease their speed. Rather, accelerate it, creating it midair. She glided with footwear of ice. Emilia's velocity accelerated midair, out of the pursuing tail whip's reach. The runway of ice produced midair accelerated Emilia's fluttering silver hair, which were being followed by the tail merely an instant behind, and Emilia. Hick. Having leapt out from the runway, Emilia's kick drew near Volcanica's throat with incredible speed. It evaded its forelimbs aiming to grasp Emilia, and like a thrown lance, straight ahead, it reached the white scar at Volcanica's throat. Volcanica, Hauariapri. With Emilia's white shoe heels capturing its throat, Volcanica screeched once again. Emilia shouted Kyra A and plugged her ears upon the voice that seemingly fissured the skies and fell at once due to the recoil of the kick. Emilia, Kaya, ha thanks. The ice warriors who were supposed to have become a foothold for her and fallen, caught the plunging Emilia. Saved by the light impact, Emilia stood up at that spot, and confirmed that she had returned to the uppermost stratum and that Volcanica was agonizing high in the skies. Afterwards, she once again dashed towards the monolith of the central pillar. Running, dashing, she sprinted towards the handprint of the monolith, which she felt was visibly familiar. Emilia. I knew it. Reaching the monolith, she pressed her hand this time with no hindrances. Though the monolith was shaken by her energy and impact, Emilia's hand perfectly overlapped with the handprint in question. She did not know how many people there were in this world who possessed identical hands, but at the very least, this handprint of the monolith belonged to someone whose hand was identical to Emilia's. And, Volcanica, thou who hath reached the top of the tower, step forth through the first floor, almighty petitioner. Emilia, ah. The divine dragon descended whilst flapping its wings, towards Emilia who had placed her hand on the monolith. With its enormous build levitating in the air, having rebound from sanity to its state of Alzheimer's, it once again repeated its initial question. However, that question felt unlike the initial ones, which had seemingly stemmed from everything being on the extremities of trance. She felt that the questioning was surely going to commence. Volcanica, I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, I ask the will of thee who hath reached the summit. Words she had heard, time and time again. Ask the will of the one who hath reached the summit. In other words, it was asking the emotions of the one who had reached the top. What did one wish to do? What did one wish for? What did one come here for? Emilia had plenty of answers for that question. What she wished to do, what she wished for, what had she come here for, the answers were many. However, right now in these very moment, Emilia's urgent desire was, Volcanica, I ask. Thy will, The overlapping question, as it entered Emilia's ears, she widened her eyes and opened her mouth, and loudly answered, "Emilia, for everyone to get along." The scene changes. That instant, a violent gust blew, swallowing the sand sea within. Subaru shouted, "Whoa!" as he evaded the witch beast's fierce attacks, and even Beatrice shouted, "What I suppose?" whilst gruelingly healing Meili. The same went for Julius, who was engaged in an inhuman battle unfolding against Shala. No, his astonishment may have been something greater. For the dusty whirlwind concealed his field of vision, and though he had stepped back sensing danger, there had been no pursuit after him. And with the answer right before his eyes, Julius' astonishment increased. "Julius, this is Subaru." Subaru. "Ha, what? I can't see anything because of the goddamn sand." Julius. "Do not mind, this way." Hearing Julius' earnest call, Subaru turned towards that direction whilst throwing up the sand inside his mouth. And upon doing so, he understood the reason behind Julius' desperation and widened his eyes. That was Subaru. "Shala, Bishihan." Subaru raised a startled voice. What entered into his field of vision was the figure of the Crimson Scorpion, bathing in the sandy whirlwind and toppled, its multitude of legs overturned on the sand. The guardian of the watchtower, who had shown a range of responses to attacks and had cornered them with mechanic movements, an error was yielded in its actions that had been in accordance with the star she called oneself as. Subaru. Did it do something? Julius. No, nothing special. It was focused on enduring the attack, and the instant the gust of sand blew earlier. Subaru. Gust of sand. That's right, that wind was. There was something off about calling the vehement wind that had swallowed Subaru and the others as a gust of sand. The gusts of sand mercilessly swallowed those who entered the Augria sand dunes. But since they had broken through the barrier of problems, never even once had wind blown in the environs of the watchtower. Not anything worth calling a gust of sand. That reason why that had blown just now, Beatrice. "Subaru, look, in fact, the sky." So shouted Beatrice at Subaru with her cute voice. Subaru looked up when he heard her. The alteration that had occurred in Pleiades' watchtower, a sudden change easy to grasp. Subaru. The clouds have cleared up. The Pleiades' watchtower, stretching to the heavens, piercing through the clouds. Its uppermost stratum had been literally invisible from below due to being covered by clouds. The queer clouds that had concealed the watchtower now proceeded to disappear. He then finally noticed the gale from earlier had been the aftermath of dispersing those clouds. The clouds subsided, and the summit of the tower was visible from below. What that could mean, according to Subaru's hopeful observations, was solely one. Subaru. Did you do it, Emilia? Within the whispering Subaru's perception, the comrades inside the tower who were being sensed by Cor Leonis, namely Emilia, followed by Ram and Patrash, whose sensations had disappeared earlier, now returned. Ram and Patrash had likely headed to back Emilia and produced the fruits of their labor. In other words, if Subaru's thoughts were correct, Subaru. The tower's rules were rewritten, Shala. Hey, Shala, listen to me. Bishan, Subaru. You don't have to fight us, not anymore. You can now freely. The reason behind the suffering of the toppled, agonizing Crimson Scorpion was perhaps due to the severing of the covenant of antiquity etched within oneself. He was unaware of any specific details, but it was fine now. She no longer needed to suffer. Subaru, hey, Shao Julius, hick, Subaru. Trying to call out to her, Subaru's nape was grasped as he approached. That moment, the sharp tail stabbed through the empty space. The gale brushed past him. The scent of burning air entered his nose, and Subaru was rendered speechless. Had Julius not stopped him just now, he would have been struck by the direct hit. However, what was tormenting Subaru was not the sensation of death. Subaru. Hey, Shala, why's this happening? Get a hold of yourself. Shala, Bishian. Whilst listening to Subaru's frantic implore, the Crimson Scorpion slowly reformed its stance atop the sand. The Crimson Scorpion rectified its posture after being toppled. Its compound eyes flickering, however, it slowly perceived Subaru once again as drool spilled down from its fiendish fangs. That did not seem to be the behavior of a being with reason, Julius. Subaru, it is regrettable, but... Pronouncing so, Julius grasped Subaru's shoulder and sought to step ahead. However, discerning his thoughts, Subaru gripped his arm and restrained him. He could tell that Julius was kindly going to take up the role of the villain, but he could not allow him to. Subaru. To save her, that's what I resolved. I am going to save her out of this. Julius, you mean to say that is your duty as her unaware Master Sama? Subaru. No. Shaking his head horizontally, that was how Subaru responded to Julius' words. That was wrong. Subaru wanted to save Shala not because he was her Master Sama, Subaru. It's not because I am her Master Sama. I was moved by her kindness, that's why. Subaru. It's the same as Biko. How can you leave someone who is always all alone in this stupid sand tower, and cried because of how fun the days she had spent with us were for her? Gnashing his molars, Subaru declared so with Julius' arm still in his grip. Gazing back at Subaru, Julius took a breath. Julius, such obstinacy, but that is what should be done. Subaru, Julius. Julius, no, I was allured once again. I had put up appearances once. Then they must be put up until the very end, you see. Faintly smiling, Julius answered so whilst touching the wound on his left cheek with a finger. Subaru narrowed his eyes at his answer and noticed a soft sensation grasping his free left hand. The one behind that action was Beatrice. She was peering at Subaru with her round, utmost lovable eyes in this whole world. Beatrice. Meili's no longer in critical condition. What remains is to Subaru. Will you help getting her out? Beatrice. How brutish would Betty be should she refuse now, in fact? Geez, Subaru is a truly hopeless partner, I suppose. Beatrice's reply made Subaru give a bitter smile as he scratched his head. Subsequently, firmly grasping the hand of his precious contract spirit, he faced the crimson scorpion Shala once again. The two spirit knights, standing side by side, faced the young maiden who must be saved. And Subaru. At this point, both my mind and body are totally drained. So hurry up and get saved, Shala. Pleiades watchtower capture, curtains open to its final prolongation.